chat, and I have teammates that will be moderating the chats for question as well. So before we get started, Angel, I'm gonna do you a favor, and I'm gonna open up with a really bad joke in preparation for tomorrow. What does Aladdin wear to the office on casual Fridays? Okay, I didn't expect an answer. The answer is his blue genies. Okay, so I would ask you all not to hang up after that horrible joke, but without further ado, we are going to turn it over. I'm going to turn it over to Angel. So Angel, please take it away. And the topic, of course, today is Teams governance, and this is part 1. Next week at this day and this time, we will do part 2. Thank you. Take it away, Angel.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you guys are joining from. Thank you for the great introduction. So today in the webinar series, we're going to focus on probably something that's apropos for everybody here around team security, compliance, and privacy, and the overall governance of teams, and a lot of common questions that we get asked about, is Teams secure? Is Teams compliant? How do we secure privacy? How do we audit? How do we maintain the both the data security as well as the message security within the platform? So the big question we get as we go through this journey is always, how compliant is Microsoft Teams? Of course, like any M365 component that you purchase, that goes through a whole team certification process. So you'll see as part of the standard guidances that we put in the security centers as well as in the trust center, we have a strong commitment to the both privacy and security. So we're ISO 27001, ISO 27018, EU model clauses, GDPR, HIPAA, SSAA 16 SOC 1 and SOC 2 reporting, FedRAMP moderate if you're in the GCC, moderate high if you are in GCC high, as well as we have a DoD cloud IRS 1075 and high trust compliant. So essentially when you sign up for M365 and you get our standard agreement, you will see that Teams covers, as well as with all the other M365 components, all these certifications. So when we look at some of the security controls that exist in M365 that we have added into Teams to, again, allow for the protection of the data within the collaboration platform. So ATP, which has been popular, which existed heavily in the Exchange and then the OneDrive environment, and now exists as an extension into Teams, safe links, safe attachments, and of course, conditional access policy. So all these things, which you may have been familiar with as part of the other M365 workloads, as well as some of the other things that you have probably learned from the other webinars, exist and flow into Teams to allow you to control access to the platform, as well as secure and protect the data that's being shared on the platform. And, obviously, very apropos given the current climate in the world, when we look at these components, they really protect against the most common entry points when you're looking at, a cyber attack or a hack within your environment. Most of this comes through things that's sent externally and open in the environment, and then exposes the environment to those external threats. When we look at the compliance piece of it, which is how do we protect the data? How do we govern the data within Teams? Again, Teams being an extension of the M365 platform, you get those traditional services that exist for other information platforms within M365, like the Information Protection Suite, the Data Loss Prevention, Information Governance, Insider Risk Management, Communication Compliance, Advanced eDiscovery, and then Audit and Reporting. So you have these tools that you use today, or you may use today on other pieces of the M365 platform that can be extended into the Teams ecosystem to allow you to have what we kind of call that single pane of compliance and security, in that if it's on the M365 platform, I can audit, manage it, and monitor it just like any other messaging or data component within M365. So let's talk about the first area, which is called information protection. So this is the concept of being able to classify and understand sensitive and business critical data across your organization. So we have a lot of things that you may have learned of in the previous webinars, as well as overall with M365, this concept of labeling and protecting data that is contained within the environment, and then providing additional protections so that that data does not leave the what we call the internal boundary of the organization. So when we're talking about you're in M365, you're part of that organization, you can use those labels and those protections to make sure that the information isn't properly leaked externally or properly shared within the environment. So, we have a lot of intelligence through our AI engine when we talk about being able to classify and then use trainable classifiers with exact data matches to be able to really nail down and create effective labels to target specific data that's being shared and even specific wording that's being shared within the environment. Again, when we look at how this becomes as a part of the greater M365 story, the biggest thing, which you probably learned through all these webinars, is how unified that is. So when we talk about we set up labels, Teams becomes an extension of that, of a targeted area for that labeling. And then when you look at it, you're not just looking at it for Teams, you're looking at labeling the data across the platform and being able to successfully target that data, whether it's shared in Teams, whether it's shared in Exchange, whether it's in OneDrive. And for those of you who are familiar with the way Teams is architectured, Teams is just basically leveraging all those other platforms to give you that single pane of collaborative glass to look through. And it's extensible. So you can extend the protection experience, not only within Teams, but across other non-Microsoft apps and services. So when we talk about the ability to extend things that may be part of Teams, but are not native Microsoft applications, these information protections can be extended to those extensibles when we talk about third-party apps and we talk those things that bring in that are allowed within Teams. That Microsoft information protection boundary extends to those third-party apps as well. Data loss prevention. So data loss prevention is a big concern for people who are using Teams. So how do I prevent data from being improperly shared within the platform? So just like you have in other platforms with data loss prevention, that does come now into Teams. So you have the ability to, again, provide different sensitivity tags, and within the sensitivity tags, automatically block messages. So if someone is chatting something, someone's sending something that is identified as sensitive information, it'll automatically block and then educate the end user by providing a policy tip. So for example, I may have a project that I'm all excited about and I'm going to chat about, and Microsoft will say, hey, we're going to create a sensitivity label to target if anyone tries to send anything about this project. So I try to post something about this project and I'll get a nice little message that says, hey, I can't send your message. And by the way, you are, in violation of an NDA, or you're in violation of protected data that you shouldn't be sent. We also have a great classification engine that's built into the platform. It supports 90 different types of sensitive information types, and you can even create custom sensitive info type creation. So again, when we look at the way we layer the security within M365 by creating these sensitivity labels, which are assigned to policies, which are assigned to workloads within M365, including Teams, it really allows you to narrow down and specify the specific and target it in such a way that you're effectively blocking those key sensitive pieces of data that you don't want shared in the platform. So when we look at the information on the endpoints, you have the ability, again, a lot of people leverage Windows 10, they leverage Office apps. A lot of people use Edge within the environment. The nice thing about it is because, as you are aware, Microsoft develops and builds all these platforms, you get that native protection. So when you set up these policies and you're using those platforms, you don't have to deploy additional agents to be able to really employ that data loss prevention. If you're using, go ahead. I heard question.
Sorry.
Oh, there wasn't a question?
Yeah, we'll be taking questions at the end of the presentation if there's time.
Okay, gotcha. So again, it's that native protection that when you put it into the M365 platform, Teams as a native Office app in coordination with data that's being shared on the native platform will allow you to, again, have that without having to install additional agents or additional software to provide that protection. It's very seamlessly deployed. So again, since it's cloud delivered and it's built into the cloud and all these applications exist as an extension of the M365 cloud, you don't have to worry about doing another, again, heavy configuration or heavy deployment to do it. It's built into the platform. It's very lightweight, and once you build these policies and you build in these protections, they're immediately available to the agents and to the applications. And again, the biggest thing is it's very tightly integrated. So when we look at the Microsoft information protection layer in conjunction with data loss prevention, these integrate to build, again, on the existing security platform that you have built around M365 and allows you to build on. So you look at, you provide, the Microsoft information protection and then the data loss prevention, and together they provide that build on capability to protect and retain the data that's contained within Teams, as well as the extension of the M365 platform. So the next big piece, we kind of talked on the first silo. So there's two silos we've covered today so far. So we talk about, is the platform secure? And the platform is secured as far as all the various certifications, the encryption, the ability to control access, as well as the data that's put on the platform natively. We talked about being able to identify sensitive types of data on the platform and effectively target and prevent those from being shared. And then we talked about the concept of data loss prevention, which is basically making sure that the data that is shared is appropriate and isn't properly leaked beyond the secure boundary of the M365 and the Teams platform. So those are I would call that the first pillar. So you got the security pillar, you got the information pillar, and now we're going to look at the governance pillar. So the other part of this is, once the data is on the platform, how do I govern it? And governance covers, how do I take that and make sure it's properly classified, properly retained, or properly removed from the platform, given a policy-driven mechanism. And in some cases, even if a user removes a piece of information and there is a policy that requires me to retain that information, that information does indeed remain on the platform. And that's what we call information governance. So when we talk about information governance, we talk about first of the concept of in-place management. So a lot of traditional platforms that have data stored in multiple locations, it becomes a real challenge to manage those records. Usually they have a third-party application that's connecting to all these elements and then pulling that information out and managing it. Given that Teams, as an extension of the M365 ecosystem, and as an extension of that, the security and compliance center that exists within the M365, you really have an in-place management. So when you put your data into the cloud, whether it's Teams or another M365 workload, you have the ability to have that centralized in-place management. So when you create policies, the policies can be applied and centralized within that security layer that exists across Teams, as well as the rest of the M365 platform. You have the ability to automate a lot of policies. So again, when we think about the cloud and we think about putting data there, some of the big struggles become about, well, I'm talking about a collaboration platform. I have messages, I have files, I have meetings, I have all these things, and it generates a large amount of data. So how can I take and classify that appropriately at scale? So there's a lot of policies that are built in, a lot of policies that you can create that you can classify that data at scale. And you could do things like common things like file properties, pattern recognition, trainable classifiers. These are things that can go across those multiple modalities and those multiple classifications of different types of data, and allow you to have a commonality that I can look through across that data to apply those policies and essentially allow for that at scale identification and governance of that data, which is a challenge as we move into this, hybrid work, a lot of data in a lot of different places. So beyond just the automation and the in-place management, there's a lot of things that allow you to go in and, again, create defensible processes to be able to again govern that data. So when we talk about things like label analytic insights, defensible disposal, and rich audit trails, that's another piece of that. So again, once the data is properly governed, being able to go into that data, be able to look at it analytically, being able to dispose of things that need to be disposed of, and then be able to audit it becomes a key piece to the information governance piece. And again, those are things that are built in to the Security and Compliance Center. And then we do have some data connectors. So when we talk about managing third-party elements, so essentially we have, for example, if you have, a Twitter feed or you have a Facebook feed, and those things are not natively controlled within the Microsoft ecosystem, we do have partners that build connectors that allow you, again, to extend that governance beyond just the M365 platform, but that those things that actually interoperate or work with the Teams platform. And this is just kind of a build out showing, of course, we natively support all those ecosystems. So SharePoint, Skype, Exchange, Yammer, Teams, groups, all those things are protected under the native thing. But then we also have that ability through the connectors, this third-party data that may be shared in through Teams or through other applications, to be able to bring those under the whole holistic platform. So again, when I run an audit or if I look at information governance, I can see that data across the native apps as well as those third-party apps that I may be integrating with. So let's talk about how we classify and govern data and records intelligently within the Security and Compliance Center as well as Teams itself. So you can see here, there's a lot of automated policies you could create. You can specify locations such as SharePoint, OneDrive, Exchange, Teams, Skype, Yammer, and groups. And why this becomes important is because when you look at Teams as well, the Teams is a construct, right? So Teams, you'll have some stuff that's stored in OneDrive, you'll have stuff that's stored in SharePoint, you'll have stuff that's stored in Exchange, you'll have stuff like chat that's natively within Teams. You may have Yammer that's integrated into Teams. And then, of course, Teams form groups underneath. So being able to target all these locations to build those policies. And again, the nice thing is if the way Teams works in conjunction with these applications is if I have a OneDrive, it's not a different OneDrive if I'm in Teams versus a OneDrive that I'm using every day. So when I apply that policy to OneDrive, it governs the data that I would just share natively in OneDrive as well as the data that is contained within Teams. And the same thing with SharePoint and Exchange and Yammer groups. So it's this concept of I can create one policy, apply it to a user, and then Teams as an overlay to these will respect those policies that are created for classification and the governing of data. You have the ability to look at the metadata and properties or the content types, so you can classify. So one thing here that is useful with a lot of these tags is a lot of people ask who are enabling our voice workload. They ask about voicemail, and they ask about this concept of like, okay, well, I know voicemail is stored within Exchange, but I want to classify voicemail differently because I want to apply a different governance to a voicemail versus just a regular email. And that's one of the things that the ability to create policies and look at the content type. So I can classify a message type or a content type as voicemail. And then I could apply a different retention or different governance policy to a voicemail versus just a regular Exchange email that exists. Even though they exist in the same ecosystem, that content type allows me to really classify for a specific element within that location to target for a particular governance or data classification. You have the keywords in queries. So when we look at the ability to look at specific words that may be contained across a range of data, so whether it be a document, whether it be a message, whether it would be something, I have the ability, again, to say that, okay, well, if someone puts in classified anywhere, I want to go ahead and I want to target that for a particular governance or data classification. There's 100 out of the box custom sensitive information types. So there's pre-built information types that you can add and automatically configure. And then you have 6 out of the box, build your own trainable classifiers that you can use to build custom sensitive information types on your platform. And then when we look at the classification piece, you have retention policies. You have the ability to specify a retention period and then an action based on the retention period. You have levels of immutability. So when you look at retention, regulatory record labels, you have different actions that you can apply. So you can say, I have a period. I have the level that I'm looking to retain. Then I have the action that I put on that, which is I can retain, delete, or put it into a disposition review. And then I could even create enforcement points, which are when a certain event occurs or when a content was created, modified, or last labeled, I can use that as a way of actioning the policy. So this is when we look at, why do we want to do all these things? Why do we want to look at security? Why do we want to look at compliancy? Why do we want to make sure that we're properly governing data? There's the world we live in today. There is a huge range of risks and violations that occur within the organization. And some of it intentional, some of it non-intentional. So when we look at a lot of these things, these are common things that IT organizations, and especially the security organization, really have to focus on, making sure that data is not improperly shared. The theft of intellectual property, somebody committing fraud using a corporate resource, insider trading if you're a financial organization or a government entity. Sensitive data leaks, data that's not meant to be shared outside the information boundary, security violations, whether internal or external, confidentiality violations. Microsoft being a large organization developing, through that type of organization, making sure that NDAs aren't violated. Workplace violence. So believe it or not, being able to track somebody cyberbullying somebody threatening violence on the platform, policy violations. So essentially when you set up a policy, enforcing it on the various communication platforms, especially Team, that can be used for internal and external communication. Conflicts of interest. So 2 people within an organization discussing something that would cause a conflict of interest for the organization. Workplace harassment, so to extend to workplace violence, again, somebody harassing somebody in email or in chat, and regulatory compliance violations. So obviously, especially when we're talking state and government, local state and government, financial, federal, there's regulatory compliances that they have to follow. And you want to make sure you identify it versus somebody else or somebody externally recognizing a regulatory compliance violation. So how does the Security and Compliance Center as a extension of Teams help you identify that? So you have a lot of machine learning that goes in that can look for, the various policies, look at user activity, and identify signals that can be centralized and viewed by an administrator or security compliance team to identify what it sees as insider risk. Privacy is a big thing within all our platforms. So anonymity, anonymous controls ensure data about risk is appropriately managed. So, we want to protect, of course, the privacy of the users on the platform. So that's key. And then one of the big things that we've always been well known for and extends to Teams is the end-to-end investigation. So the ability to create a eDiscovery motion and be able to make sure that the data is secure, it's kept, but also to protect the chain of custody. So when people are building and reviewing these discovery elements, that they're done in such a way that only the people who should have access to that information are the ones who are actively reviewing it and have access to that sensitive information in an investigation. So we look at communication compliance. This is something that if you're using Teams, we talk about the traditional things like Exchange, OneDrive, Outlook, all those things. But this becomes very pertinent when you're talking about a real-time collaboration environment like Teams. So making sure that the communication that's being held on the platform is appropriate, compliant to policy, and also to make sure that it's healthy. So make sure that there's not things that are being said and done on the platform that allow for an unhealthy work environment. So again, you have this concept of building very intelligent, customizable playbooks that again leverage our internal machine learning and our AI to detect violations and be able to report that in a way that can be easily digestible by the security groups and or security admins on the platform. The automatic creation of flexible remediation workflows, so the ability to, once a violation is identified, to put that into a workflow, which can lead to something like an eDiscovery case being automatically generated, to allow again for that flexible ability to go from a violation being identified to a violation being actioned to a violation being resolved. And then the ability to create actionable insights. So, you can gain insight into these, policy violations on the platform, new pattern detection, and communication trends. So when you look at something like the communication compliance engine, it really allows you to get that, again, single pane of glass across all the communication that's occurring on the platform and allow you to easily identify anything such as abusive language, policy violations, people who are improperly sending information or sensitive data. It allows you to have that single pane of glass to look and monitor that. And I'm going to go through some slides to kind of show this in action here. So here's an example of, there was a policy, a pattern that detected that essentially was something that was identified as an actionable event. In this case, the thing of please wire $100,000 to this account number. Normally when you see patterns like that, that's associated with either insider trading or something inappropriate that may be occurring within the system. So it flags that. Me as a security administrator can go in, I begin seeing the conversation, so I can review it and see what, if it was in fact something that the system saw as, misidentified, or in fact, if it is a violation of a policy. I then can go in and I can look at, for that person, a specific person within that. So looking at their message, then I can look and I can see, well, within the past 30 days, how many times, have I seen a policy match or remediation action against that person? And then where I found that policy match. So again, I can look at that. I can look at that individual message, but I can also see, based on that user, how many times something they've done have been flagged as a policy, either actioning or causing a policy violation that's identified within the system. I then can send a notice. So for example, and here's an example of somebody who sent an abusive piece of language, and then I can send them from there a notice right away that says, hey, this is, the use of this language is violation of XYZ company policy. And that notice would be sent out directly from that compliance engine. I then can also choose to remove these messages. So essentially, I've sent a notification. Now I want to remove these messages because they're in violation of the policy. I can go ahead and remove it, or remove it off platforms that it's been identified on. And then ultimately, if I find that this is the pattern, or there was something that requires investigation, I can automatically highlight those events and create a eDiscovery case and pull it right into the eDiscovery Center for it to be escalated into a full-blown investigation. So again, the nice thing about this is, without having to jump around the platform to do these things, I can easily have the system be actively looking for these violations, identify a violation, notify me, allow me to review it, and then allow me to action it all from that centralized location. So it allows for a very easy way to make sure that I'm protecting and governing, and especially when we look at teams with the chat, making sure that that is all being properly monitored and properly actioned. So the next big piece we're going to cover is, obviously, we've talked about securing the platform, looking at how we can protect the data on the platform, and how we can govern the platform, and how we could identify and quickly action violations and policy violations that are identified on the platform. So the next piece of it is really talking about, how do I audit this information? So now that I have this data and I want to effectively see this data that's been collected, and be able to look through it as part of either a active investigation that I'm conducting, and or to look at the content that maybe a particular user has been sending as part of an investigation. Now we talk about the eDiscovery engine. So just like, again, all the other applications that exist within M365, eDiscovery is extended to Teams as well. So when I create an eDiscovery for a user, again, I'll look at those components that are contained that Teams uses, like SharePoint, OneDrive, Exchange. But then I can also look at the chat components, the telephony components, and even the voicemail components that are being sent as a holistic view of all the communication and or data exchanges the users had on the platform. So when we look at, with the in-place eDiscovery, we look at trying to mitigate risk. We look at the ability to log and audit from one place. So again, the Security Compliance Center as an overlay to the whole EAM 365 engine, including Teams, allows you to have that one place to log and audit. So essentially, with more traditional platforms, that logging and auditing may exist in multiple places. But with Teams as an extension of M365, everything comes under that one umbrella that I can easily log and audit across all those workloads. And then I have the ability to identify, again, via keyword searches and all those things, very specific matter relevant content, and allow that to be exported out for, again, either a third party or somebody to review that information off-site of the system. So when we talk about, doing in-place eDiscovery, you do get a cost reduction. So because it's built in and because it's all retained, it's a lot easier to get that centralized footprint of the data. So you get a lower cost per custodian average, and it reduces collection time. So if we were to think about, okay, well, I'm on this collaboration platform, but my email's over here, my files are over here, having it all being discoverable in one place. Again, when I run a keyword, if I'm looking for a particular interaction, I can put that in, and then the system will look across all the data that's stored, all the messages that are stored, and basically produce one exportable output. So I'm collecting in one point, and it can very quickly collect across all those areas that I'm storing data and retaining data and doing message exchanges. And if I'm looking at voice, even the voice components with phone calls, individual peer-to-peer calls, voicemails that are left, if they're in scope, could easily be collected through that interface. And of course, it makes it a lot more efficient, having it all be part of the M365 platform. As an administrator, someone who has delegated access as a security administrator, I could go in, I can create, and I can review that content faster. And then with some of the extensions we talked about for the third-party apps and the third-party integrations, I can even review that non-Microsoft content that's associated with that user. So with advanced eDiscovery, that is a layer that is one above just standard eDiscovery. So you have standard eDiscovery, which is basically I put in search keywords, I put in specific things that I'm looking for, and then it goes ahead and it matches and it produces a very large export. In some cases, that's great. In some cases, you may need some additional machine learning to be able to really make sense of all that data. So this is where advanced eDiscovery comes into play. So if you have that, you can then take that eDiscovery case with the eDiscovery output, send it over into the advanced eDiscovery engine. And then what the advanced eDiscovery engine does is it looks at all that data and it really begins to crawl and index the data so that it makes it more usable as an exportable item if you wanted to basically look at taking and further granulating the information so it's more relevant and targeted. But this is a great engine to, again, when you're doing a lot of these eDiscovery searches, to really get down to having very specific data about what you're looking for via the machine learning engine, and being able to maintain and see that in a more formatted as well as a more scoped view of the eDiscovery output. So, part of the things when we talk about eDiscovery, and we look at what we call usually custodians, which are going to manage and hold that data. So we have the ability to, within the Security and Compliance Center, manage those custodians. So we can add and remove custodians. You can apply your legal holds here. You can manage legal required workflows to those custodians and their acknowledgement. So you can have a workflow that when a case is created, that it makes sure it's going through the proper checks and people are acknowledging as they go through the discovery case. And then you could see the activity. So you can see who's accessing it, who's actively looking at the data to make sure that, again, there's proper access and there's proper management of those users who are looking at that data. And this just shows again what that looks like. So you'll see here, here's a custodian that's signed up with certain controls. Here's an example of a custodian and what their role is, and then the ability to view their activity. So again, this is just a way of, when you look at traditional case element engines, they'll have these things built in, and they're also available as part of the security and compliance center to allow you to properly manage a case or a legal hold within the environment. And this is going a little bit more into what we do as far as when we collect content. So some of the analytics that occurs, some of the deep crawling, some of the deep investigation that occurs. So this allows you, again, when you look at eDiscovery, produces quite a bit of data. So this allows you to scope that content, tune queries to minimize the amount of volume that's returned. It allows you to look at deeper processing of the data. So to look at specific file types, maybe higher size limits, to extract and index the text and metadata. And then again, to really increase transparency of what's being looked at and what's being investigated. So looking at, error reporting, item level auditing, error remediation, those types of things are built in within the platform. So as far as the case data itself, you have the ability to view the content of the review set. So the nice thing about this is this is just showing something, again, like a native viewer. So if you pulled up a PowerPoint, instead of having to go in and dump the PowerPoint file and look at it, you have native viewers that allow you to see the data in line with the case that's created. You can construct conversations. So instead of just looking at this is a conversation, you could reconstruct the conversation and see the conversation flow. You have a lot of data visualization that allows you to visualize the data from the investigation. And then you do have the ability to collect non-Office 365 data into the review set. So you can see things like with OCR, native views and annotated viewers of content that is shared within the environment but is non-native O365 data. And again, this is just showing some slides of how that looks like. So this is an example of, looking at a text viewer of some content that was provided there. Here's a kind of like an annotated view of that documentation. Then this is actually kind of like reconstructing that conversation you can see there within the slide build out. And then some of the, again, analytics that you can see with the widgets around specific search contents within the data that's been provided. So some other things as far as the analysis with the machine learning that you get through the O365 compliance engine. So you can do near duplication. So you could recognize duplication and prevent that from showing up in the output. You can do email threading to, again, this is something that you'd have to manually do if you didn't have an engine like this, but it'll construct based on the flow what an email conversation looks like, and then even be able to use machine learning based on content classification. So you could specify, potentially what they would call high value content, which is data that's very relevant to the investigation. And then you could even identify things like, okay, this is attorney-client privilege or offensive language, so that, again, when this is shared, because normally what we see, and this is probably relevant to a lot of the security agencies here, is you'll have someone who collects the data, but then you'll have a third party that analyzes the data, which might be a legal firm. So this allows you, again, to provide a more correlated set of data that when it's provided to the third party, it's kind of at least pre-mined and has that, though some of those contexts is already put to play to make it easier to analyze. So when we look at the advanced audit capabilities, this is where you could really get into of the forensic analysis of and the compliance investigations. So again, it allows you to really, when you look at the audit piece of it, you could look at crucial events. So this is where, for example, you may go in and you may want to look at, okay, well, we saw something suspicious going on the platform. So let's look at this particular person to see what they were doing, be able to pull that at. So this is kind of an overlay. So when we talked about eDiscovery, that was very specific to data, content, chat that's on the platform. When we look at auditing, now we're looking at actions that were performed on the platform. You have the ability to go through the audit logs. You can preserve audit logs for up to a year. And then, with the high bandwidth access to data, you can get, again, that quick access to the audit and be able to, again, look at that audit information quickly on the platform. All right, so I'll kind of pause there. We're 10 minutes in, but we kind of covered very high level, just some of the key topics. You may have heard this in other webinars, and the key is that a lot of this stuff applies to teams. In the next session, we'll go a little bit deeper into doing more of a looking at the individual tools and being able to kind of walk through what this looks like in action. But I'll open it right now to questions in the last 10 minutes here for the team.
We just talk out loud, or?
Yeah, if you want to use, if you have a question, just ask it, or you can use the raise your hand feature, which a lot of people use as well.
Sorry, I didn't raise my hand. I just jumped in.
Oh, no problem.
Jeff Rockyard from DOT. I had a question about how Microsoft officially defines PII. And I saw a response, but it just says the DLP policy templates.
So the way, there are predefined. So the way we control PII on the platform is through DLP. We have predefined templates that look at common PII data based on the PII statutes. But you can use those out of the box, and they'll identify traditional PII stuff. And you have the ability to customize or build specific DLP policies to identify stuff that maybe you identify as PII, or maybe the system is not capturing properly through the standard PII templates that are available through DLP.
Gotcha. So I'm editing the thing that I just posted, but this is what the Department of Labor has stated, and check.
Yeah, Jeff, that came in all black.
Yeah, the text is there. I don't know why it's black.
Yeah, I highlighted it here.
I can provide a link to the website that
Yeah.
has to.
But we also have over 200 sensitive information types that you can use. You're not limited to the templates that I responded about, or what Angel mentioned. There's a large number that you can choose from, and many of them relate to PII.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. I'll send you a link that has all of them.
So everyone can see it.
We also it looks like we have Dave Roberts.
Yeah, so basically out of the things you just went over, as far as Teams governance is concerned, the only thing we can do is DLP policies, unless advanced eDiscovery was purchased or communication compliance is purchased, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's some elements there. I mean, yeah, and I guess that's maybe I should have caveated. And in the next one, the next session, we kind of go into a little bit more details around the licensing that's required. Um, but yeah, I think some of those are E5 specific features that you would need. Obviously the advanced eDiscovery is an add-on, but you do get a lot of that standard eDiscovery stuff we talked about out of the box. The retention policies is something you would get, if you're at an E3 level. The communication compliance, I guess, I don't know, Leo, is that something that comes only with E5 or?
Sure. And I can show a slide. We can cover this real quick.
All right.
Well, I mean, when you say the eDiscovery stuff is, they're out of the box, you mean as far as core eDiscovery? I mean, I know we can discover stuff in core eDiscovery, but as far as like you were demonstrating, if we see something, we can have it automatically create a case and all that.
Yeah, I think that there's a communication compliance piece, which that may be an additional add-on or included, and maybe Leo, you could go through what that piece. Yeah, but in the advanced eDiscovery is also, I think, an E5 piece. Those things are more with the more advanced SKUs. But
Okay.
yeah, like the basic eDiscovery, the case management, to my understanding, that should be available within E3.
Right. So what Angel was presenting today, there's 2 licenses that can get you there. You can either use the eDiscovery and Audit add-on, or if you have Office 365 G5 or Microsoft 365 E5 compliance. And for communication compliance and insider risk, there's also an add-on. So if you have G3, you can get this add-on, or you can go all up with E5 compliance.
But all at an extra cost to what we're paying now.
Well, what's your current licensing?
Can you drop that description that you just provided in the chat for us? It would be very helpful.
This slide?
Yes. No, your description that you just provided. Either you can get their 2 licenses to get you there, eDiscovery, yada yada. If you can write that up at the end and put that in the chat for us, it would be really helpful.
Sure.
The New York State is E3.
Okay.
G3.
Okay. Yeah. And if you're interested in learning more about licensing or the topics that Angel has covered today, please reach out to your account teams.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Or alternative, everybody, if you just simply put a request in the chat here, we'll follow up after and we'll proactively reach out to you to make arrangements.
Right. Let's see who's. I think Dave, your hand is still up. Did you have an additional question?
Nope. Sorry. I got to take that down. There we go.
Right. Is there any other questions? And like I said, in part 2, part 1, this first part was more kind of just to talk about the individual elements, and then in the second part was more of a interactive walkthrough per se to look at all the tools. And in that one, there's a little bit better of a depiction of what's included. But to Leo's point, we'll make sure to when we send out follow up to this, we'll make sure to explain the licensing pieces so you understand what's included and not included based on the licensing that you own. And then I'll make sure that you have access to the slide deck.
And Angel, is part 2 the same time next week?
I believe so. Look at the schedule.
Yep. Same time, same bat channel, same bat time.
Awesome.
Another bad joke to end the call with.
Leo, yours is worse than mine. I'm just saying, but okay.
Do you have a comparison of E3 and E5? I don't know, Leo, is that something you have handy?
Yeah, I'll post a screenshot of the slide I was presenting in the chat. I'll also do a little description of what you can get if you have G3. So putting that in there now for you, Peter.
I have also posted a link in the chat that will provide some more information regarding licensing.
Thank you, Bibi. And thank you, Angel, for excellent presentation.
My pleasure. Hopefully this was helpful, and I look forward to doing part 2. And thank you, team, for your support as well.
Yeah, it was great. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good day.
Thank you. Bye.